Hi folks, welcome back to our Tuesdays with Morrie reading. This is the third session in our Tuesdays with Morrie series. If you're following along with me in your book, we're on page 46. Here we go. In my sophomore year, I take 2 more of his courses. We go beyond the classroom, meeting now and then just to talk. I have never done this before with an adult who was not a relative, yet I feel comfortable doing it with Morrie, and he seems comfortable making the time. Where shall we visit today? He asks cheerily when I enter his office. In the spring, we sit under a tree outside the sociology building, and in the winter, we sit by his desk, me in my gray sweatshirts and Adidas sneakers, Morrie in Rockport shoes and corduroy pants. Each time we talk, he listens to me ramble. Then he tries to pass on some life lesson. He warns me that money is not the most important thing, contrary to the popular view on the campus. He tells me I need to be fully human. He speaks of the alienation of youth and the need for connectedness with the society around me. Some of these things I understand, some I do not. It makes no difference. The discussions give me an excuse to talk to him. Fatherly conversations I cannot have with my own father, who would like me to be a lawyer. Morrie hates lawyers. What do you want to do when you get out of college? He asks. I want to be a musician, I say. Piano player. Wonderful, he says, but that's a hard life. Yeah, a lot of sharks. That's what I hear. Still, he says, if you really want it, then you'll make your dream happen. I want to hug him, to thank him for saying that, but I am not that open. I only nod instead. I'll bet you play piano with a lot of pep, he says. I laugh. Pep? He laughs back. Pep? What's the matter? They don't say that anymore? The first Tuesday, we talk about the world. Connie opened the door and let me in. Morrie was in his wheelchair by the kitchen table, wearing a loose cotton shirt and even looser black sweatpants. They were loose because his legs had atrophied beyond normal clothing size. You could get 2 hands around his thighs and have your fingers touch. Had he been able to stand, he'd have been no more than 5 feet tall, and he'd probably have to fit into a 6th grader's jeans. I got you something, I announced, holding up a brown paper bag. I had stopped on my way from the airport at a nearby supermarket and purchased some turkey, potato salad, macaroni salad, and bagels. I knew there was plenty of food at the house, but I wanted to contribute something. I was so powerless to help Morrie otherwise, and I remembered his fondness for eating. Ah, so much food, he sang. Well, now you have to eat it with me. We sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by wicker chairs. This time, without the need to make up 16 years of information, we slid quickly into the familiar waters of our old college dialogue. Morrie asking questions, listening to my replies, stopping like a chef to sprinkle in something I'd forgotten or hadn't realized. He asked about the newspaper strike, and true to form, he couldn't understand why both sides didn't simply communicate with each other and solve their problems. I told him not everyone was as smart as he was. Occasionally, he had to stop to use the bathroom, a process that took some time. Connie would wheel him to the toilet, then lift him from the chair and support him as he urinated into the beaker. Each time he came back, he looked tired. Do you remember when I told Ted Koppel that pretty soon someone was going to have to wipe my ass? He said. I laughed. You don't forget a moment like that. Well, I think that day is coming. That one bothers me. Why? Because it's the ultimate sign of dependency. Someone wiping your bottom. But I'm working on it. I'm trying to enjoy the process. Enjoy it? Yes. After all, I get to be a baby one more time. That's a unique way of looking at it. Well, I have to look at life uniquely now. Let's face it. I can't go shopping. I can't take care of the bank accounts. I can't take out the garbage, but I can sit here with my dwindling days and look at what I think is important in life. I have both the time and the reason to do that. So, I said, in a reflexively cynical response, I guess the key to finding meaning of life is to stop taking out the garbage. He laughed, and I was relieved that he did. As Connie took the plates away, I noticed a stack of newspapers that had obviously been read before I got there. You bother keeping up with the news? I asked. Yes, Morrie said. Do you think that's strange? Do you think because I'm dying I shouldn't care what happens in this world? Maybe. He sighed. Maybe you're right. Maybe I shouldn't care. After all, I won't be around to see how it all turns out. But it's hard to explain, Mitch. Now that I'm suffering, I feel closer to people who suffer than I ever did before. The other night on TV, I saw people in Bosnia running across the street, getting fired upon, killed, innocent victims, and I just started to cry. I feel their anguish as if it were my own. I don't know any of these people, but how can I put this? I'm almost drawn to them. His eyes got moist, and I tried to change the subject, but he dabbed his face and waved me off. I cry all the time now, he said. Never mind. Amazing, I thought. I worked in the news business. I covered stories where people died. I interviewed grieving family members. I even attended the funerals. I never cried. Morrie, for the suffering of people half a world away, was weeping. Is this what comes at the end? I wondered. Maybe death is the great equalizer, the one big thing that can finally make strangers shed a tear for one another. Morrie honked loudly into the tissue. This is okay with you, isn't it? Men crying? Sure, I said, too quickly. He grinned. Ah, Mitch, I'm going to loosen you up. One day, I'm going to show you it's okay to cry. Yeah, I said. Yeah, he said. We laughed because he used to say the same thing nearly 20 years earlier, mostly on Tuesdays. In fact, Tuesday had always been our day together. Most of my courses with Morrie were on Tuesdays. He had office hours on Tuesdays, and when I wrote my senior thesis, which was pretty much Morrie's suggestion right from the start, it was on Tuesdays that we sat together, by his desk or in the cafeteria or on the steps of Perlman Hall, going over the work. So it seemed only fitting that we were back together on a Tuesday. Here in the house with the Japanese maple out front. As I readied to go, I mentioned this to Morrie. We're Tuesday people, he said. Tuesday people, I repeated. Morrie smiled. Mitch, you asked about caring for people. I don't even know. But can I tell you the thing I'm learning most with this disease? What's that? The most important thing in life is to learn how to give out love and to let it come in. His voice dropped to a whisper. Let it come in. We think we don't deserve love. We think if we let it in, we'll become too soft. But a wise man named Levine said it right. He said, love is the only rational act. He repeated it carefully, pausing for effect. Love is the only rational act. I nodded like a good student, and he exhaled weakly. I leaned over to give him a hug, and then, although it is not really like me, I kissed him on the cheek. I felt his weakened hands on my arms, the thin stubble of his whiskers brushing my face. So you'll come back next Tuesday? He whispered. He enters the classroom, sits down, doesn't say anything. He looks at us, we look at him. At first, there are a few giggles, but Morrie only shrugs. And eventually, a deep silence falls, and we begin to notice the smallest sounds. The radiator humming in the corner of the room. The nasal breathing of one of the fat students. Some of us are agitated. When is he going to say something? We squirm, check our watches. A few students look out the window. trying to be above it all. This goes on a good 15 minutes before Morrie finally breaks in with a whisper. "What's happening here?" he asks. And slowly a discussion begins, as Morrie has wanted all along, about the effect of silence on human relations. Why are we embarrassed by silence? What comfort do we find in all the noise? I am not bothered by the silence. For all the noise I make with my friends, I am still not comfortable talking about my feelings in front of others, especially not classmates. I could sit in the quiet for hours if that is what the class demanded. On my way out, Morrie stops me. "You didn't say much today." "I don't know. I just didn't have anything to add." "I think you have a lot to add. In fact, Mitch, you remind me of someone I knew who also liked to keep things to himself when he was younger." "Who?" "Me." The second Tuesday, we talk about feeling sorry for yourself. I came back the next Tuesday, and for many Tuesdays that followed. I looked forward to these visits more than one would think, considering I was flying 700 miles to sit alongside a dying man. But I seemed to slip into a time warp when I visited Morrie, and I liked myself better when I was there. I no longer rented a cellular phone for the rides from the airport. Let them wait, I told myself, mimicking Morrie. The newspaper situation in Detroit had not improved. In fact, it had grown increasingly insane. With nasty confrontations between picketers and replacement workers, people arrested, beaten, lying in the street in front of delivery trucks. In light of this, my visits with Morrie felt like a cleansing rinse of human kindness. We talked about life and we talked about love. We talked about one of Morrie's favorite subjects, compassion, and why our society has such a shortage of it. Before my third visit, I stopped at a market called Bread and Circus. I had seen their bags in Morrie's house and figured he must like the food there. And I loaded up with plastic containers from their fresh food takeaway, things like vermicelli with vegetables and carrot soup and baklava. When I entered Morrie's study, I lifted the bags as if I'd just robbed a bank. "Food man!" I bellowed. Morrie rolled his eyes and smiled. Meanwhile, I looked for signs of the disease's progression. His fingers worked well enough to write with a pencil or hold up his glasses, but he could not lift his arms much higher than his chest. He was spending less and less time in the kitchen or living room and more in his study, where he had a large reclining chair set up with pillows, blankets, and specially cut pieces of foam rubber that held his feet and gave him support for his withered legs. He kept a bell near his side, and when his head needed adjusting or he had to go on the commode, as he referred to it, he would shake the bell and Connie, Tony, Bertha, or Amy, his small army of home care workers, would come in. It wasn't always easy for him to lift the bell, and he got frustrated when he couldn't make it work. I asked Morrie if he felt sorry for himself. "Sometimes, in the mornings," he said. "That's when I mourn. I feel around my body. I move my fingers and my hands, whatever I can still move, and I mourn what I've lost. I mourn the slow, insidious way in which I'm dying. But then I stop mourning." Just like that. I give myself a good cry if I need it, but then I concentrate on all the good things still in my life, on the people who are coming to see me, on the stories I'm going to hear, on you if it's Tuesday, because we're Tuesday people. I grinned. Tuesday people. Mitch, I don't allow myself any more self-pity than that. A little each morning, a few tears, and that's all. I thought about all the people I knew who spent many of their waking hours feeling sorry for themselves. How useful it would be to put a daily limit on self-pity. Just a few tearful minutes and then on with the day. And if Morrie could do it with such a horrible disease, "It's only horrible if you see it that way," Morrie said. It's horrible to watch my body slowly wilt away to nothing, but it's also wonderful because of all the time I get to say goodbye. He smiled. Not everyone is so lucky. I studied him in his chair, unable to stand, to wash, to pull on his pants. Lucky. Did he really say lucky? During a break, when Morrie had to use the bathroom, I leafed through the Boston newspaper that sat near his chair. There was a story about a small timber town where two teenage girls tortured and killed a 73-year-old man who had befriended them, then threw a party in his trailer home and showed off the corpse. There was another story about the upcoming trial of a straight man who killed a gay man after the latter had gone on a TV talk show and said he had a crush on him. I put the paper away. Morrie was rolled back in, smiling as always, and Connie went to lift him from the wheelchair to the recliner. You want me to do that? I asked. There was a momentary silence, and I'm not even sure why I offered, but Morrie looked at Connie and said, Can you show him how to do it? Sure, Connie said. Following her instructions, I leaned over, locked my forearms under Morrie's armpits, and hooked him toward me as if lifting a large log from underneath. Then I straightened up, hoisting him as I rose. Normally, when you lift someone, you expect their arms to tighten around your grip, but Morrie could not do this. He was mostly dead weight, and I felt his head bounce softly on my shoulder and his body sag against me like a big, damp loaf. Ah, he softly groaned. I gotcha, I said. Holding him like that moved me in a way I cannot describe, except to say I felt the seeds of death inside his shriveling frame. And as I laid him in his chair, adjusting his head on the pillows, I had the coldest realization that our time was running out, and I had to do something. It is my junior year, 1978, when disco and Rocky movies are the cultural rage. We're in an unusual sociology class at Brandeis, something Morrie calls group process. Each week we study the ways in which the students in the group interact with one another, how they respond to anger, jealousy, attention. We are human lab rats. More often than not, someone ends up crying. I refer to it as the touchy-feely course. Morrie says I should be more open-minded. On this day, Morrie says he has an exercise for us to try. We are to stand, facing away from our classmates, and fall backward, relying on another student to catch us. Most of us are uncomfortable with this, and we cannot let go for more than a few inches before stopping ourselves. We laugh in embarrassment. Finally, one student, a thin, quiet, dark-haired girl, whom I notice almost always wears bulky white fisherman sweaters, crosses her arms over her chest, closes her eyes, leans back, and does not flinch, like one of those Lipton tea commercials where the model splashes into the pool. For a moment, I am sure she's going to thump to the floor. At the last instant, her assigned partner grabs her head and shoulders and yanks her up harshly. Whoa, several students yell. Some clap. Morrie finally smiles. You see, he said to the girl, you closed your eyes. That was the difference. Sometimes you cannot believe what you see. You have to believe what you feel. And if you are ever going to have other people trust you, you must feel that you can trust them too, even when you're in the dark, even when you're falling. The third Tuesday, we talk about regrets. The next Tuesday, I arrived with the normal bags of food, pasta with corn, potato salad, apple cobbler, and something else, a Sony tape recorder. I want to remember what we talk about, I told Morrie. I want to have your voice so I can listen to it later, when I'm dead. Don't say that. He laughed. Mitch, I'm going to die, and sooner, not later. He regarded the new machine. So big, he said. I felt intrusive, as reporters often do, and I began to think that a tape machine between two people who were supposedly friends was a foreign object, an artificial ear. With all the people clamoring for his time, perhaps I was trying to take too much away from these Tuesdays. Listen, I said, picking up the recorder, we don't have to use this. If it makes you feel uncomfortable. He stopped me, wagged a finger, then hooked his glasses off his nose, letting them dangle on the string around his neck. He looked me square in the eye. Put it down, he said. I put it down. Mitch, he continued, softly now. You don't understand. I want to tell you about my life. I want to tell you before I can't tell you anymore. His voice dropped to a whisper. I want someone to hear my story. Will you? I nodded. We sat quietly for a moment. So, he said, is it turned on? Now, the truth is, that tape recorder was more than nostalgia. I was losing Morrie. We were all losing Morrie. His family, his friends, his ex-students, his fellow professors, his pals from the political discussion groups that he loved so much, his former dance partners, all of us. And I suppose tapes like photographs and videos are a desperate attempt to steal something from Death's suitcase. But it was also becoming clear to me, through his courage, his humor, his patience, and his openness, that Morrie was looking at life from some very different place than anyone else I knew. A healthier place, a more sensible place. And he was about to die. If some mystical clarity of thought came when you looked death in the eye, then I knew Morrie wanted to share it. And I wanted to remember it for as long as I could. The first time I saw Morrie on Nightline, I wondered what regrets he had once he knew his death was imminent. Did he lament lost friends? Would he have done much differently? Selfishly, I wondered if I were in his shoes, would I be consumed with sad thoughts of all that I had missed? Would I regret the secrets I had kept hidden? When I mentioned this to Morrie, he nodded. It's what everyone worries about, isn't it? What if today were my last day on Earth? He studied my face, and perhaps he saw an ambivalence about my own choices. I had this vision of me kneeling over at my desk one day, halfway through a story, my editor snatching the copy even as the medics carried my body away. Mitch, Morrie said. I shook my head and said nothing, but Morrie picked up on my hesitation. Mitch, he said, the culture doesn't encourage you to think about such things until you're about to die. We're so wrapped up with egotistical things, career, family, having enough money, meeting the mortgage, getting a new car, fixing the radiator when it breaks. We're involved in trillions of little acts just to keep going. So when we don't get into the habit of standing back and looking at our lives and saying, is this all? Is this all I want? Is something missing? He paused. You need someone to probe you in that direction. It won't just happen automatically. I knew what he was saying. We all need teachers in our lives. And mine was standing in front of me. Fine, I figured. If I was to be the student, then I would be as good a student as I could be. On the plane ride home that day, I made a small list on a yellow legal pad, issues and questions that we all grapple with, from happiness to aging to having children to death. Of course, there were a million self-help books on these subjects and plenty of cable TV shows, and $90 per hour consultation sessions. America had become a Persian bazaar of self-help. But there still seemed to be no clear answers. Do you take care of others or take care of your inner child? Return to traditional values or reject tradition as useless? Seek success or seek simplicity? Just say no or just do it? All I knew was this. Morrie, my old professor, wasn't in the self-help business. He was standing on the tracks, listening to death's locomotive whistle, and he was very clear about the important things in life. I wanted that clarity. Every confused and tortured soul I knew wanted that clarity. Ask me anything, Morrie always said. So I wrote this list: death, fear, aging, greed, marriage, family, society, forgiveness, a meaningful life. The list was in my bag when I returned to West Newton for the fourth time, a Tuesday in late August when the air conditioning at the Logan Airport terminal was not working, and people fanned themselves and wiped sweat angrily from their foreheads, and every face I saw looked ready to kill somebody. By the start of my senior year, I have taken so many sociology classes, I am only a few credits shy of a degree. Morrie suggests I try an honors thesis. Me? I ask. What would I write about? What interests you? He says. We bat it back and forth until we finally settle on, of all things, sports. I begin a year-long project on how football in America has become ritualistic, almost a religion, an opiate for the masses. I have no idea that this is training for my future career. I only know it gives me another once-a-week session with Morrie. And with his help, by spring, I have a 112-page thesis, researched, footnoted, documented, and neatly bound in black leather. I show it to Morrie with the pride of a little leaguer rounding the bases on his first home run. Congratulations, Morrie says. I grin as he leaps through it, and I glance around his office. The shelves of books, the hardwood floor, the throw rug, the couch. I think to myself that I have sat just about everywhere there is to sit in this room. I don't know, Mitch, Morrie muses, adjusting his glasses as he reads. With work like this, we may have to get you back here for grad school. Yeah, right, I say. I snicker, but the idea is momentarily appealing. Part of me is scared of leaving school. Part of me wants to go desperately. Tension of opposites. I watch Morrie as he reads my thesis and wonder what the big world will be like out there. The audiovisual, part 2. The Nightline show had done a follow-up story on Morrie, partly because of the reception for the first show had been so strong. This time when the cameramen and producers came through the door, they already felt like family. And Koppel himself was noticeably warmer. There was no feeling out process, no interview before the interview. As warm-up, Koppel and Morrie exchanged stories about their childhood backgrounds. Koppel spoke of growing up in England, and Morrie spoke of growing up in the Bronx. Morrie wore long-sleeved blue shirt. He was almost always chilly, even when it was 90 degrees outside. But Koppel removed his jacket and did the interview in shirt and tie. It was as if Morrie were breaking him down one layer at a time. You look fine, Koppel said when the tape began to roll. That's what everybody tells me, Morrie said. You sound fine. That's what everybody tells me. So how do you know things are going downhill? Morrie sighed. Nobody can know but me, Ted. But I know it. And as he spoke, it became obvious. He was not waving his hands to make a point as freely as he had done in their first conversation. He had trouble pronouncing certain words. The I sound seemed to get caught in his throat. Or is that an L? I think that's an L. In a few more months, he might no longer speak at all. Here's how my emotions go, Morrie told Koppel. When I have people and friends here, I'm very up. The loving relationships maintain me. But there are days when I am depressed. Let me not deceive you. I see certain things going on and I feel a sense of dread. What am I going to do without my hands? What happens when I can't speak? Swallowing, I don't care so much about. So they feed me through a tube. So what? But my voice, my hands, they're such an essential part of me. I talk with my voice. I gesture with my hands. This is how I give to people. How will you give when you can no longer speak? Koppel asked. Morrie shrugged. Maybe I'll have everyone ask me yes or no questions. It was such a simple answer that Copple had to smile. He asked Morrie about silence. He mentioned a dear friend Morrie had, Morrie Stein, who had first sent Morrie's aphorisms to the Boston Globe. They had been together at Brandeis since the early 60s. Now Stein was going deaf. Copple imagined the two men together one day, one unable to speak, the other unable to hear. What would that be like? We will hold hands, Morrie said, and there'll be a lot of love passing between us. Ted, we've had 35 years of friendship. You don't need speech or hearing to feel that. Before the show ended, Morrie read Copple one of the letters he'd received. Since the first Nightline program, there had been a great deal of mail. One particular letter came from a school teacher in Pennsylvania who taught a special class of 9 children. Every child in the class had suffered the death of a parent. Here's what I sent her back, Morrie told Copple, perching his glasses gingerly on his nose and ears. Dear Barbara, I was very moved by your letter. I feel the work you have done with the children who have lost a parent is very important. I also lost a parent at an early age. Suddenly, with the camera still humming, Morrie adjusted his glasses. He stopped, bit his lip, and began to choke up. Tears fell down his nose. I lost my mother when I was a child, and it was quite a blow to me. I wish I'd had a group like yours, where I would have been able to talk about my sorrows. I would have joined your group because, his voice cracked, because I was so lonely. Morrie, Copple said, that was 70 years ago. Your mother died. The pain still goes on. You bet, Morrie whispered. The professor. He was 8 years old. A telegram came from the hospital, and since his father, a Russian immigrant, could not read English, Morrie had to break the news, reading his mother's death notice like a student in front of the class. We regret to inform you, he began. On the morning of the funeral, Morrie's relatives came down the steps of his tenement building on the poor Lower East Side of Manhattan. The men wore dark suits. The women wore veils. The kids in the neighborhood were going off to school, and as they passed, Morrie looked down, ashamed that his classmates would see him this way. One of his aunts, a heavy-set woman, grabbed Morrie and began to wail. What will you do without your mother? What will become of you? Morrie burst into tears. His classmates ran away. At the cemetery, Morrie watched as they shoveled dirt into his mother's grave. He tried to recall the tender moments they had shared when she was alive. She had operated a candy store until she got sick, after which she mostly slept or sat by the window, looking frail and weak. Sometimes she would yell out for her son to get her some medicine, and young Morrie, playing stickball in the street, would pretend he did not hear her. In his mind, he believed he could make the illness go away by ignoring it. How else can a child confront death? Morrie's father, whom everyone called Charlie, had come to America to escape the Russian army. He worked in the fur business, but was constantly out of a job. Uneducated and barely able to speak English, he was terribly poor, and the family was on public assistance much of the time. Their apartment was a dark, cramped, depressing place behind the candy store. They had no luxuries, no car. Sometimes to make money, Morrie and his younger brother David would wash porch steps together for a nickel. After their mother's death, the two boys were sent off to a small hotel in the Connecticut woods, where several families shared a large cabin and a communal kitchen. The fresh air might be good for the children, the relatives thought. Morrie and David had never seen such greenery, and they ran and played on the fields. One night after dinner, they went for a walk, and it began to rain. Rather than come inside, they splashed around for hours. The next morning, when they awoke, Morrie hopped out of bed. "Come on," he said to his brother. "Get up." "I can't." "What do you mean?" David's face was panicked. "I can't move." He had polio. Of course, the rain did not cause this, but a child Morrie's age could not understand that. For a long time, as his brother was taken back and forth to a special medical home and was forced to wear braces on his legs, which left him limping, Morrie felt responsible. So in the mornings, he went to synagogue by himself because his father was not a religious man. And he stood among the swaying men in their long black coats, and he asked God to take care of his dead mother and his sick brother. And in the afternoons, he stood at the bottom of the subway steps and hawked magazines, turning whatever money he made over to his family to buy food. In the evenings, he watched his father eat in silence, hoping for, but never getting, a show of affection, communication, warmth. At 9 years old, he felt as if the weight of a mountain were on his shoulders. But a saving embrace came into Morrie's life the following year. His new stepmother, Ava. She was a short Romanian immigrant with plain features, curly brown hair, and the energy of two women. She had a glow that warmed the otherwise murky atmosphere his father created. She talked when her new husband was silent. She sang songs to the children at night. Morrie took comfort in her soothing voice, her school lessons, her strong character. When his brother returned from the medical home, still wearing leg braces from the polio, the two of them shared a roll-away bed in the kitchen of their apartment, and Ava would kiss them goodnight. Morrie waited on those kisses like a puppy waits on milk, and he felt deep down that he had a mother again. There was no escaping their poverty, however. They lived now in the Bronx, in a one-bedroom apartment in a red brick building on Tremont Avenue, next to an Italian beer garden where the old men played bocce on summer evenings. Because of the Depression, Morrie's father found even less work in the fur business. Sometimes, when the family sat at the dinner table, all Ava could pull out was bread. "What else is there?" David would ask. "Nothing else," she would answer. When she tucked Morrie and David into bed, she would sing to them in Yiddish. Even the songs were sad and poor. There was one about a girl trying to sell her cigarettes. "Please buy my cigarettes. They are dry, not wet by rain. Take pity on me, take pity on me." Still, despite their circumstances, Morrie was taught to love and to care, and to learn. Ava would accept nothing less than excellence in school, because she saw education as the only antidote to their poverty. She herself went to night school to improve her English. Morrie's love for education was hatched in her arms. He studied at night by the lamp at the kitchen table. And in the mornings, he would go to synagogue to say Yizkor, the memorial prayer for the dead, for his mother. He did this to keep her memory alive. Incredibly, Morrie had been told by his father never to talk about her. Charlie wanted young David to think Ava was his natural mother. It was a terrible burden to Morrie. For years, the only evidence Morrie had of his mother was the telegram announcing her death. He had hidden it the day it arrived. He would keep it for the rest of his life. When Morrie was a teenager, his father took him to a fur factory where he worked. This was during the Depression. The idea was to get Morrie a job. He entered the factory and immediately felt as if the walls had closed in around him. The room was dark and hot, the windows covered with filth, and the machines were packed tightly together, churning like train wheels. The fur hairs were flying, creating a thickened air, and the workers, sewing the pelts together, were bent over their needles as the boss marched up and down the rows, screaming for them to go faster. Morrie could barely breathe. He stood next to his father, frozen with fear, hoping the boss wouldn't scream at him too.
During lunch break, his father took Morrie to the boss and pushed him in front of him, asking if there was any work for his son. But there was barely enough work for the adult laborers, and no one was giving it up. This, for Morrie, was a blessing. He hated the place. He made another vow that he kept to the end of his life. He would never do any work that exploited someone else, and he would never allow himself to make money off the sweat of others. "What will you do?" Ava would ask him. "I don't know," he would say. He ruled out law because he didn't like lawyers. He ruled out medicine because he couldn't take the sight of blood. What will you do? It was only through default that the best professor I ever had became a teacher. And that is the end of our third session of Reading Tuesdays with Morrie. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope to see you again soon. Thanks for watching.